So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Dana Knapp, and I'm with ArtsKC, and we are here with a small but mighty team, along with all of you. And the purpose of this workshop and the one that's subsequent to this is just to add yet one more opportunity to support the artists in our community. We have a lot of offerings for professional development and capacity building and just skill building. And this is yet one more that really underpins artists' access to capital. As you know, ArtsKC is a grant-making program, inspiration grants, and long-standing opportunity for individual artists. That is a charitable giving. That's a donation. But there are many other opportunities for artists to both build their financial strength and have access to capital. And this workshop and the subsequent one are both to help artists apply for grants like inspiration grants, but also to maybe open your knowledge and opportunities to access different kinds of funding and capital. And so that brings me to introductions. Phyllis Hardwick with Community Capital Fund is our partner in this endeavor. And she's here to talk with you a bit about other opportunities. And then also with us is the mighty Chris Dalquist. And she has just a wide array of expertise and experience, and she's today going to bring her expertise around budgeting and some financial management concepts. So I'll pass it off now, but I'm just super thrilled to have yet one more opportunity to support the brilliant artists in our community, and to have just one more or two more opportunities to fund and invest in what you do. So.
Thank you so much, Dana. I share in your excitement. As a fellow grant maker, I think that access to grant-based capital serves a very important instrumental part into growing artists' work and their crafts. You may hear a little bit of background ambiance over here on my side, just because my 1-year-old school was closed today because of snow, but that means that he is getting exposed to budgeting in the arts very early, which is exciting. At Community Capital Fund, one of our most important roles is being a financial intermediary, often for cities that are looking to get grant-based capital into the hands of artists and other small business owners. And so when they have this opportunity to partner, and go ahead and get some cuteness while he's down there. Yep, there you go. While we have the opportunity to partner with ArtsKC, we thought it was important that we do it around this issue, because budgets and financial strength is something that is often considered and evaluated when applying for grant-based capital and other types of capital. So I'm really excited that Chris is here to share this information, just because it's a critical piece that we often see that needs to be strengthened in the community and in the small business community. So I'm really excited for this session, and we'll be joining muted from here on out. Thanks so much, guys.
Wait, Chris.
Tara and Mariah, do y'all want to introduce yourselves real quick before we get rolling?
Sure, I can go ahead. My name is Mariah Hilson. I'm the Director of Programs and Services at ArtsKC. I'm here to answer any questions. I'll also be the one monitoring chat. So if you ask any questions, I'll be sure to answer those. And mostly you'll just be hearing from Tara and Chris today. Tara?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tara Karaim. I am the new program manager of grants at ArtsKC. I started at the end of October of last year. I'm really excited to be here and to help with budgets, especially for inspiration grants, but to just provide this opportunity for artists. And I'll let Chris take it away after me, but hopefully we'll have some time at the end where I can talk more about inspiration and answer any specific questions about that as well.
Thank you, Mariah and Tara. And thank you for being with us today. Some familiar faces on the screen and some that I don't know. So I hope by the end of our hour together, I will get to know y'all a little bit better. I'm really excited that Tara and Mariah, Dana are here. A lot of times as artists, we feel like the folks that are giving us access to this kind of funding are sitting in an office somewhere. There's someone, oftentimes artists are intimidated by the person on the other side of the grant. So I want you to understand that these people that are making these opportunities available to us as artists are people that love the arts, that love artists and want to be giving us these opportunities. So please reach out to Tara, Mariah, and Dana whenever you have any questions, right? That's what they're here for, and why I think it's so important that they introduce themselves to you. So I'm Chris Dalquist. I'm a visual artist here in Kansas City. I'll show you a little bit more about my practice as we move forward. I'm super happy to be here. I've been working for years on trying to make capital more available to artists and to demystify where it comes from, how we get access to it, what it looks like on the back end for both us and for the funders. So thank you, Dana, and ArtsKC, Phyllis, for making this available. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm glad that there's just a few of us here so that we can actually have a conversation around this. Let me share my screen here. All right. So first off, I just want to introduce myself and then get a feel for how y'all feel about budgets. So like I said, I'm Chris Dahlquist. I'm an artist advocate and creative strategist. For a dozen years, I've been helping artists not only have access to capital, but figure out how strategically it fits into their practice, how they might be able to access different parts and how that can move them forward. First and foremost, though, I am a visual artist. My practice is driven in two main areas. One, accessibility of art for all audiences, which means that I show a lot in non-traditional settings. So in addition to galleries, I also travel coast to coast participating in juried art festivals. And I make large scale public installations. So some of my budgeting that I'll show you for is actually for projects that I've been involved with and how I've approached building those budgets. And the other thing that drives everything that I do is empowering artists to live the life that they choose. So not only is that with funding, but other skills that might be necessary. That translates to me working with individual artists, but also working with municipalities, funders, and organizations to make opportunities available to artists. So when I'm coming to you today, not only am I coming from the standpoint of my personal practice and the projects that I have gotten funded, but also from sitting across the table with literally hundreds and hundreds of other artists as they're building budgets for the projects that they want to achieve. And likewise, sitting across the table from funders as they're doing underwriting for some of these and sitting on grant panels, those sorts of things. So wearing both hats. So I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself and let's talk about let's just start out by talking about how we feel about budgets. And a lot of times people come in to these conversations with tons and tons of preconceptions, baggage around the financials of being an artist. So feel free to either unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. How do you feel about budgets right now, or what comes to mind when you're thinking about budgets and finances as an artist? Anybody got any feelings around this?
I'm not an artist, but I run an organization in Topeka called Arts Connect. And I really love budgets, but I'm never really sure if I'm doing it right. Like, I love that they like have that power to tell a story that you can't really tell in the narrative. But I also feel like there's so many different requirements and different grant opportunities and funding spaces that I sometimes feel like it's, yeah,
Mhm.
that I'm missing something.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And it's good to see you here. Sarah and I are working together, have been working together for a few weeks now. Anybody else? What else comes up when you start thinking about budgets or making budgets? Yeah, Kirsten.
I guess budget is very a little bit.
I'm sorry, Kirsten, you're breaking up for me. Is anyone else able to hear better? No,
Audio go
sorry,
out?
Kirsten.
Did my audio go out? Sorry.
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So sorry for the background music. But I don't know where did it cut out at? Sorry.
A lot of it was pretty
To start from the beginning.
garbled. So, yeah.
I'll take the beats out. So I did one of the hearts for Creative Hearts, and in budgeting for me and a lot of the artists that did, we soon realized that we underestimated how much we needed. A lot of it was our first like large scale art thing, from being, home painters or whatever.
Yeah.
Just budgeting in for the unexpected, I guess.
Yeah. Excellent. Anyone else? Kind of where are you coming from? Or what brought you to our conversation today?
I think a few things. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to read when we're ready. I'll read through some of the chats that have been shared.
Mhm.
I just feel like a little bit like, I'm used to working by myself or like one or two other people. And I'm used to like really having a small budget and keeping that small. Like that's part of not my mission in life, but as a cellist, that's what I usually get. And I'm used to budgeting small. And I think I'm excited to kind of expand my horizons and my mental thought about it. Like, oh, there's money out here. I don't have to do this project for $5 and make zero money. Like, I would like to, be more educated about that.
Yes.
I
Fantastic.
recently wrote a grant for it's a video arts project. And I think one of the challenges for me, because I'm a business head, I'm not an artist, but it was hard to gauge how much time, right? Art is a creative process. So when you're talking about a project, you estimate time, but boy, it could be on either side of that estimate when it's all said and done.
Mhm. So we'll address that along with Kirsten's kind of estimation of expenses too. Like where do we get these numbers from? Yeah, Mariah, you want to read some of the chat?
Yeah. So Eileen said budgets scare me. Melinda said would rather spend time doing other things, but she recognizes that it's necessary. Jerry experiences frustration. Eileen again, she's not a numbers person and would rather talk to people about the organization than I assume spend time on budget. Laurel, I hope I pronounced that right. Laurel said it's hard to know how much things will cost for a project you've never done before. So sounds pretty similar to what you were saying, Kirsten. And is it Kirsten or Kristen?
It's Kirsten.
And then Eileen also said having to create a very specific program that a grant budget is going to support is always challenging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's thanks for letting me just kind of take the temperature of the room and see that so many of us have got the same concerns, right? And I think, you know, there's so many myths about artists and money and budgets and all of that we are grow up with, right? Artists are bad with money. Artists should do everything on the cheap, right? All of these things. So we want to break down a whole lot of that. And let me tell you that my experience all of these years working with artists is that artists are actually fantastic with money. So being good with money and having money are not synonymous. Those are not the same things, right? So the artists I know are amazing with money. They're amazing at being able to take resources and being able to visualize what it is that they can do with them and being able to stretch what it is that they can do with them. There's also this myth that artists are bad at math, right? And while some might be more comfortable with numbers than others, the truth is that budgeting is not about arithmetic. So there is some arithmetic involved, but at the end of the day, that's not really the primary part of budgeting. So we'll talk about how to get around that as we move forward and where the arithmetic does come in. But really the creative brain can be really, really good at budgets and can be really, really good with money. When I started working with some lenders to put some programs together for artists, some lenders were sharing with me that they had never, ever had an artist at a particular bank here in town, had never had an artist default on a loan. Like that is amazing, right? So let's just break down this idea that like, we're not good at this. We are good at this if we're given the right tools and if we learn a way to think about it that works with the way our brain works. So let's think about what it is. What is a creative brain and why we're so good at this, right? As artists, we're really great at imagining possibilities, right? We're really great at being able to picture something that doesn't already exist and what it might look like existing in the world. We're really observant and we listen well, right? We're able to see and recognize patterns in the world around us, put things together in new ways that others don't necessarily, it's not necessarily obvious to them. We're great problem solvers. And most of all, we're really good storytellers and communicators. And that's actually what a budget is. It's telling a story. So when we're writing for a grant or we're writing for a project or we're writing for some sort of funding, we're basically telling the funder a story. And we're telling it to them basically in 3 parts or in 3 different languages. But the story is the same across all 3 parts. So we've got the narrative, right? Whatever it is that we're writing about our project. We've got our documentation, so the visual storytelling aspect, and then the budget. And the budget is just telling the exact same story, but in numbers. So you got to start out with what is your story, right? And so a lot of times when people have trouble with their budget, it's because they haven't fully fleshed out the story of what it is that they're trying to do yet. Right? So we want to lean into this part first to really know that we understand what it is that we're doing and the story that we're telling, because that's where our strength lies, right? So a lot of times when we have trouble with budgeting, what it points back to is we've not fully developed the story of what it is that we're trying to do. So let's the other thing about a budget, any sort of budget that we're putting together, is that it's not just a collection of numbers, but it expresses our values and our aspirations, right? So it should show the funder, it should show someone on the other side of that budget what's important to us, right? So when we look at a budget that, for instance, is not paying other artists, right? Or not paying ourselves as an artist, right? Then we're expressing what's important to us. When we put those things in there, we're showing them, this is important. This is what I value, right? So what are the 3, anybody know the 3 components of the budget story? The 3 things that a budget needs to tell. All right. So 1, scope, right? How big is this project that we're looking at? How big or how small? How many days? Or how many pieces? Or how many people? Or what's the length of the film? So scope, expenses, and income. Right? Anybody, surely you're familiar with the word a balanced budget. What's a balanced budget mean? Anybody? Feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah, Melinda.
That your income and your expenses balance out.
Right.
They're the
They match,
same.
right? And so you can think of it as like this scale, like a balanced scale, right? A balanced budget on a balanced scale. And the scope is how big the project is. And then your expenses and your income have to balance. You put more expenses on the expense side of the scale, you got to put more income on the income side of the scale, right? And vice versa, so that these are even across. All right, seems like a fairly simple concept, right? But oftentimes this is the most elusive part, or the hardest part to figure out, is how do we make this balance? Sometimes, like in the case of the, I believe in the case of the Hearts, or some of the projects that I'm doing, the income side is a given, right? This is how big a project you have. I'm writing a proposal right now for a public art piece, and it's $10,000. I know what the income is. Now my job is to make the expense side match that, right? So sometimes one side is a given, and then you have to work to figure out the other. All right, so scope. So the way I start all of the projects is writing the narrative, right? So writing the story of what it is that I want to do. Right? Again, we're going to lean into our skills as artists, the storyteller, the dreamer of projects, right? And so, Sasha, for you saying, I'm not thinking big enough, this is the time to really like write the narrative big. What's the thing, the big thing that you want to do? And then I start thinking about what's that going to take to do it. So again, this isn't arithmetic. This is about storytelling, right? So here's a project I did some years ago. The way I like to start a budget is graphically with a mind map, right? So this mind map that I've done here on the right just matches exactly this narrative that I've written. We're gonna look at practicing one of these together. But notice there's no numbers involved at this point. I'm just walking through the project in my head. This is where your ability to visualize what's going to happen is an asset. Walking myself through the project and putting things on a mind map. I often do this on great big paper in my studio and markers, and get kind of physical with it, different colored markers. But if you like the idea of a mind map or cost tree for a budget, there is a, this visual one that I did here was done on software, free software called Bubblus, or an app called Bubblus, BUBLE.us. And it's great mind mapping. But when you start out making the budget, I don't want you to be thinking about numbers. I just want you to be thinking about the project. I want you to be thinking about the scope. So define the parameters of the project. How long is it going to last? How many pieces? How many performances? How many people? How else might you measure it? Sasha, maybe it's how many musicians and how many performances? What other units of measure might we have when we're defining parameters? Kevin, as a visual artist, what kind of parameters might you look at? Sorry, putting you on the spot here. Maybe it's not there. All right.
Sorry, did you address that to me?
Yeah, I said as a visual artist, what kind of parameters or scope might you be looking at?
Oh, I'm a theater artist.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you
So-
were.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
So what kind of parameters are you looking at as a theater artist?
That would be, number of performances, probably also a number of the number of actors and technicians that are going to be involved in the production. Yeah.
Right. How about a visual artist? How might you measure the scope of your project? Anybody? So for me, sometimes it's number of pieces or where it's going to show, or I'm working towards a show right now at the Manhattan Arts Center that's being measured by linear feet, right? Like this is the size space that I'm working with. Anybody else? Idea of scope? Length of time? Or Kristen, for yours, it was really defined, right? You knew exactly what the scope was, right? So you didn't have a variable there, right? This was the scope. All right.
Someone in the chat said supplies needed, promotions. How broad are those promotions? Also a question for you, Chris. Will we be sending out these slides? Are you comfortable with that afterward?
Yep,
Great.
for sure. Happy to. All right. So yeah, supplies and so forth. So that would fall under our next piece of the budget puzzle, which is the expenses, right? And this is just a quick little checklist. Your results might vary, right? You might have some other things, or you might not have all of these things. But here's a checklist that you might go through. And again, we'll send out these slides so that you'll have it. So communication and marketing, someone just touched on that, how broad that might be. Do you need space to work, venue, supplies, travel, equipment, wages and labor? This can and should include yourself, commissions and fees, insurance. So if you're putting on a play in a theater, do you need to think about insurance for that space? If you're shipping your work off, do you need to think about insuring that work while it's in transit? Is it going to be insured on the other end, right? And when you don't know the answers to these questions, that gives you a clue of you haven't fleshed out the full story, right? Oh, I don't know. I don't know if they're covering the insurance or I need to. Oh, that's a place of inquiry, right? Back to the narrative, back to the scope of what you're responsible for. Legal and professional documentation of project. So that's one of the ones that gets forgotten almost all the time, is documenting the project, right? So you want to be sure that at the end of your project, it's documented in such a way that you're positioned to move on to your next project, so that you can leverage what it is you're doing now towards the next one. Contingency, so contingency is the money that you might not accounted for. We can try to be as close as we can in these budgets, right? But there's always something that comes up, right? So your budget should always include a contingency, and it should be typically a percentage of the total budget. And right now, because things are so crazy with supplies, I would suggest that that contingency be bumped up just a little bit more than usual. Because I don't know if any of y'all are experiencing it, but I'm experiencing such supply issues and labor issues that all of it's costing me a little bit more than anticipated. And it's fluctuating wildly from one month to the next.
Chris, there's a question in the chat, from earlier. Eileen, yep, that asked, is it okay to have a surplus in your annual budget? Does that relate to what you were just talking about with the contingency? It's not necessarily a surplus. It's you putting into the budget that you may need extra.
So Eileen, I think that is a difficult question to answer across the board. So yes, you can have a surplus like in your operating budget for the year. I think part of it depends on what kind of budget we're talking about writing here. When we start talking about a grant, that should balance, right? When you're looking for capital with a funder, they do want to see that you've got surplus or profit at the end of the year. So part of those questions when you're looking at funding are questions that are absolutely ones that you can ask your funder of what their expectation is in that particular budget, right? Unfortunately, some of these things aren't a one size fits all, so I can't give across the board answer. Any other questions before we go on to the next? And then your artist fee. So your artist fee is the fee that you would be writing in there for doing the administrative side, for coming up with the idea of the project. Now note that I say that wages and labor higher up can include you. So the artist fee isn't necessarily the only place as an artist that you're going to see money from that project. You can pay yourself for labor. You can pay yourself for installation. You can pay yourself. If it's something that you would be paying someone else, say you would have a graphic designer in your budget. You're going to make flyers, right? You need someone to design those flyers. Just because that's you doesn't mean that it doesn't show up in the budget. Right? So you can show up in your budget. We'll look at some actual budgets and look at how that works. But the artist fee is above and beyond where you show up otherwise in your project budget. Any other questions here before we go to the income side?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I know in another industry, when I'd written grants, one of the expectations was that you would put, I don't remember the percentage, but that whatever you had for your grant amount, you would put like 5% admin time as part of the grant. Is that something that can be done in the arts grants as well? Is that an expectation?
Can be. Yeah, I think a lot of that for an individual artist, a lot of that admin time gets rolled into that artist fee, but it's not unreasonable to think you might have another admin besides yourself, right? When we're talking about inspiration grant, we're talking a little bit more like a solopreneur, oftentimes a single artist, but definitely the larger the project, the more they might anticipate that you would have admin. And that you could play that, you could put that hat on and that fee, or you could have someone else playing that role. Again, that's a question that's fair game to ask your funder though. Is that okay for me to include administrative costs into this grant proposal? right? This is why I pointed out that they're not someone sitting in an ivory tower that's wanting to not make these grants. Their job is to make these grants, right? If you've got questions and it's not answered in their prospectus, these are all fair game to ask them, right? You're in a partnership with the funders, right? To make your project and to make these things go as good as possible, right? So they're not maintaining secrets or whatever. If it's unclear, ask. Although with the caveat, to be sure you have read their materials first and that it's not answered in what they've already provided you. Intelligent questions also help build the relationship with that funder. All right.
Hey, Chris, it's Laurel.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah. Hey, Laurel, good to hear you.
Yeah, nice to see you. You don't want to see me. I just looked at what I looked like, and it's not good. But anyway, I was wondering if there's a grant that's like, I don't know, like $15,000.
Yes.
Should your budget aim to be at 15,000, or say you can find costs and expenses that are make it 20,000? I don't know.
Yeah. So a lot of times, a lot of funders don't want to be the only money in, right?
Okay.
They want to be part of a larger project, right? So if it's a $20,000 project and the grant is for 15, then yeah, then we'll look at it on the income side where you're going to make up that difference, right?
Okay.
A lot of times they do want to be a part of something larger. That answer?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so on that income side, if we were, so let's take Laurel's example there. So the grant's going to pay for part of it. So what are some other opportunities to pay for the rest? What else is going to could show up on the income side? Could be sales, right? So this could be ticket sales. This could be sales of your artwork. This could be sales of refreshments at your theater show. This could be ads in the back of, or maybe we call it sponsorship, but maybe there's something else you have to sell. Ads in the back of your program, for instance. Grants. Individual donors. Maybe just individuals want to be a part of your funding package. In-kind donations. So we're going to talk about these a little bit more, but in-kind donations are things that you don't have to pay for. So they are things that either someone else has provided for you or you as an artist have provided. Right. So we'll talk about that. Crowdsourcing. So this seems to be waning a little bit, but crowdsourcing, personal financial contribution, right? So you can't finance all of it, nor should you be financing all of your projects, but occasionally there's times where it would make sense for you to put some money in to realize this project because it's going to help get you to the next place in your career, right? Sometimes strategically, there's some reasons to do that. And we could talk about what that might look like or when you might. And then sometimes taking some debt, right? If you know that you're going to be able to make it back on the other side. Any questions about the income side? The most important thing to understand about both the expense and the income side is that it's important to put all of it in the budget. Absolutely all of it in the budget, because it's telling a story. So for instance, if the flyers, you don't have a line in there for designing the flyer because you know you're going to design the flyer. Someone reading that budget, it's like, wow, how's that flyer going to get designed, right? Maybe they're a graphic designer sitting on the panel and they're like, oh, wow, they think that they can just put out a flyer, right? Like it's telling the story of what you're doing. It's telling the story of what you think's important. And most importantly, it's telling them that you've thought completely through your project and are not letting anything slip through the gaps, right? That's the importance of adding in the in-kind donations. We'll look at, I think it's time to look at an actual project.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
On the income, there's
Yeah.
individual cash donations and there's also crowdsourcing.
Mhm.
And crowdsourcing is basically a lot of individual cash donations that are all grouped together.
Yes.
So how would those be? I'm curious how those are differentiated on a budget.
Right. So I would think of the individual cash donations as maybe a little more significant. You know, I can think of an example of a project where the first money in, this was for some musicians, the first money in was them sending a letter to their VIP folks and asking for kind of larger donations. So these people were underwriting a significant amount of what it is that they were doing. So, you know, it was a couple of folks and they might get their name on something in return, something like that. Part of that's just splitting hairs though, right? You could put that all together in a budget.
And then when it comes to crowdsourcing, that you're not looking at each one of the individual people that donated to the crowdsourcing campaign. You're not listing them all on the budget. It just is a certain collective line item.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So if you had a goal for your crowdsourcing, you were going to do $10,000 on Kickstarter, then I would show that as one line, right?
Okay.
Where maybe you're going to give 10,000 to my project. Thank you, Kevin. Right. And then maybe that shows up as that individual donor that's a significant underwriter.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Anything else before we kind of look at an example? I'm really glad that Phyllis is here because Phyllis and I are going to put on a play. So Phyllis and I are going to put on a 3-person play for 3 nights in a 50-seat theater around the corner from my house. We're going to have an accordion accompanist. It is set in a living room with 2 sofas, a rug, and a coffee table. The 3 actors are wearing prom dresses that Phyllis and I have in our closets. We're primarily going to advertise on Facebook, but we're also going to print some flyers and sponsor some Facebook posts. We may or may not print a program and serve refreshments. All right, so thanks for playing along with me, Phyllis. Here's our little project that we're doing in Columbus Park, where I am. So first, let's look at the scope. What's the scope of this project as it's written here? Right, we got a 3-person play, 3 nights in a 50-seat theater. So there's our scope. Now let's look at our expenses, right? We can just read directly through this narrative. Everything highlighted represents an expense. This is absolutely the way that I would suggest that you approach a budget. So then we'll go through our checklist and we'll see, is everything accounted for? Boy, you know what? In this narrative, I have not said anything about our workspace. I've not said anything about where we're going to rehearse, right? So now it clears up my thinking. It helps my story become broader so these things go back and forth, right? Like, oh, it helps my story get clearer, and that helps my budget get better. So we go through our checklist. Commissions and fees. I wonder if I'm going to have to pay a fee to use that play, right? Boy, I don't know. Maybe I'll ask my friend Kevin, right? because I don't actually know the answer to this. Does this need to go in my budget?
Yes, there would be a license fee.
Right?
Can I ask a question, Chris?
Uh-huh.
So let's say you're going to rehearse in your studio rehearsal space in your basement.
Yes.
How do you write that up so that looks like something more interesting than saying we're going to rehearse in my studio basement?
So it's rehearsal space and it's
Yes.
and it's in kind. So it's
Okay. Okay.
so it shows up on your expense side and then it shows up again on your income side as in kind.
Okay. Okay.
Right? Because that lets the reviewer know what Melinda's thought through everything. She even knows where they're going to rehearse. She's considered everything that this is going to require. Depending on the size of the budget. So you could also put in the number there. What would it cost you to rent that space? And then that could show up on your, you could rent your space from yourself. Right? You need to make the budget balance. It's an in-kind donation. It also helps you understand the magnitude of the projects that you're doing. Like, right, to understand that the project that you're doing for $2,000 is not a $2,000 project, right? The project that you're doing is actually a much larger project. It's just that you're subsidizing it with your basement, with your talent, with your skill, right? But understanding the scope, the size of the project that you're actually doing is helpful. This is
So
that kind of smaller thinking, right? Like, let's actually understand what it is we're putting out into the world and be able to communicate it. Yeah, sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
Oh, that you're right. Sorry. As far as the in-kind donations go, when it comes to something like rehearsal space, do you kind of figure out what the going rate would be for rehearsal space, and then you plug that in under the rehearsal space line, and then if you are rehearsing in your basement, for example, then that ends up showing as a in-kind donation at the same cost of that?
Yes,
Okay.
Exactly. You could figure it one of two ways. Either what would similar rehearsal space cost, or if you're, this is a longer conversation than we're prepared to have here, but if you're writing off that space on your taxes, it's that same basis that you are writing it off that you would put into the budget. So if you're taking a home office, rehearsal space, home studio, whatever rate you're taking it, you would put that in your budget.
Okay, thanks.
So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go through our checklist, see if we've covered everything on the income side. So here I just threw like a quick mind map of what that would take, right? And again, see, there's no numbers on it yet, right? Right now, I'm just figuring out what's it going to take for Phyllis and I to put on this play. And now I can start then putting some numbers to it. So the prom dresses, they're not going to cost anything, but I still need to have them in my budget. Because remember, Phyllis and I had them hanging in our closet, but I still have to account for them. Accordion player, pretty cheap. It's my husband. Said I could do it for $100, right? So what do you do if you don't know the answers to this? If you don't know how much an accordion player is going to cost, where do you find those numbers? Anybody? Feel free to unmute yourself. Right? Could start calling around. You can start. I'm sorry. Did you say Amazon? Yeah, I mean, you can start shopping for things. You can ask your peer network. You can start putting the question out, right? Like, that's why I mentioned, I don't know what it's going to cost us to put a play on to get the rights to the play, but I bet my friend Kevin does, right? So you can begin asking questions of your peers. And only after we do that mind map and we start putting the numbers together, do we start putting it into a spreadsheet. So this is the inspiration grant spreadsheet. The things to know about all of this is that these are just a starting point. Anyone that gives you a template for a budget like this, you may or may not have all of those categories, and you may have considerably more categories on both the expense and the income side. Right? So this is just a starting point. Just because it's on there doesn't mean you have to spend that money. And if it's not, it doesn't mean that you don't have it. So here's some things to think through though. Understanding the funder and what they value and what their expectation is. So inspiration grant says here on the bottom, right? The total amount of expenses and the total amount of income should be equal to each other so that your budget is balanced. To Eileen's question about having excess, I will say that when I have been on funding panels for grants, if there is excess or profit, this is not that we don't want artists to make profit, but that sometimes is not as good a grant candidate. Right? It's like, oh, they're making $2,500 profit. Not sure that I feel like I need to give them $2,500. So maybe it's just psychological, right? Maybe that's not a rule, but understanding who's on the other side and how they're going to be reading this. But if it's someone that is, if it's for a bank, right? They want to understand that you've got excess, that you're making profit. Be sure that you've accounted for all expenses, even if it's coming out of the prom dress is coming out of your pocket, out of your closet. You want it listed in the budget, right? Just to indicate that you've thought through everything. So you're including all in-kind donations, made notes for anything that's unclear. So if the budget doesn't already give you a spot for notes, go ahead and put notes in there. Add categories relevant to your project and be sure that you're paying yourself. Remember, this is showing what we value, and we have to value ourselves as artists and our time. It's right there on top.
Hey, Chris, it's Laurel
Yeah.
again. Is
Yep.
paying yourself different from profits?
No, however, the artist fee would be it's typically represented more as a percentage, right? So there would be a limit there to what it would, but you could put that line back in somewhere else. Maybe you decide that you're going to pay the violinist better. Oh, this violinist rate is going to be $500, right? So that is your money then that you're making, right? But it's not excess, right? It is your fee. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Because you can go back into those and continue to move those numbers around so that they balance, right? Here's an example, and like I said, you'll get this, so we won't go into it in a lot of detail, but this is actually a large public installation that I did. I show up in it several times. You see the installer, 5 days at $200. That's it's my husband who works my studio and I. We also have an assistant who's represented there. I'll send this to you. The way I handle my studio and ancillary cost in my studio is with a studio fee. So that's extra ink, extra supplies. I think of that as like when you go to the garage to get your car fixed and they have a garage fee that just covers rags and the things that get the expendables in the studio, or the expendables in the garage. So in this case, I needed to hit that $12,000. It was a $12,000 project that I was doing. And then last, I think a budget isn't about feeling restricted. It's about making a plan and then the freedom to make the purchases after regret, without guilt or regret. Once I get them on that spreadsheet and I know it's accounted for, then I can do the project without questioning every time I run to Home Depot for another supply, right? It's like it's accounted for, it's in the budget, right? So it actually gives me freedom once I begin creating to not be weighing each of these items, each of these things. All right, I want to leave time for Tara and for questions. That's 101. So if you need to get out of here, feel free, but I am happy to stick around and answer any questions and love to hear from Tara a little bit more about how this intersects with inspiration grants and other opportunities.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, everyone, we want to be respectful of your time, but if you have questions and you have time to stay, we're here to answer them for sure. I just really wanted to briefly say that inspiration grants are open until April 4th. So, and there's more, April 3rd. There's more information on the website, and that grant template that Chris shared is accessible on the website through Word or Excel, depending on what you're more comfortable with. And if you have any questions about budgets as you're filling out the grant application, I'm here to help. You can reach me at grantmaking@artskc.org. I'll put that email in the chat. So feel free to reach out. I'm a good resource. I'm here to help. Any questions for Chris or for me or for Phyllis too?
Hi, this is Nyla. I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I thought, of course, there has to be balance. And you said if we are providing, for instance, if it's my sewing machine and I'm making the garments and my studio's in my basement, the cost of materials, even though I already have it in my studio, I can put those in the in-kind donation space.
You could either be donating it if you need to make that balance, or you could be receiving some rental income from that. That could be another place that you show up where you're actually making money on that project, because you've spent that money on that machine and that space already. So you should be compensated for it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So think about those things that if you were paying someone else to do, or if you were having to rent them, if you didn't already have those things at your disposal, what would be necessary to make that project work? Just because you already have it doesn't mean doesn't show up in there or doesn't have value.
So it sounds like, depending on who I guess the recipient of this documentation is, the budget could end up looking quite a bit different. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, my suggestion to you is that you have the master. It's kind of like when we talk about resumes or something in Artist Inc., that you should have absolutely everything in that document. And the story, maybe you're looking for a grant. If you're doing a summer-long program with students, but you're only going to look for a grant for a particular weekend or a particular show, then potentially you would carve out part of it for a particular funder, right? But you would have the master document for yourself. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. But then also in terms of when you were talking about how some places will want it to balance, other places they want to see more of a surplus or something like that. In the way it sounds like some of how you end up showing in-kind donations, for example, may end up not actually being reflected in some of the grants.
Yes.
Some of the places, and I'm not sure that feels a little dodgy in a way, I guess, because you're kind of playing with the numbers, but I think you're not also, like, do you see what I'm getting at?
Yes, I think it's a little bit, I guess it's why I referenced the resume. It's that by putting things in or leaving things out, it's just you're highlighting a different part of the story, but the story is still the same, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like you're not changing the numbers.
Okay.
Like the project still, in your master, the project still cost what it cost, right?
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
We had a question in the chat from Interurban asking, can inspiration grants be paired with innovation grants at Mid-America Arts Alliance? And in terms of restrictions on our end, and I don't know, and Tara did answer this in the chat, I'm not sure about the restrictions for Mid-America Arts Alliance, but that would just be something that would be included on the income side of your balance sheet. Is that how you would respond to that as well, Chris?
Yes, absolutely. And I know at Mid-America, like a lot of funders, they like to see other funders are paying for a project. They don't necessarily want to be the only one in there, right? It means that you're vetted. It means that they're adding their name to a project that's larger than the funding that they can provide, right? So yeah, it normally makes for a grant application to be stronger, to have multiple grants and multiple funders. It validates their decision, right? Like, oh, everybody wants in on this project. Must be a good one.
Any other questions for myself or for Chris?
Chris, this is Dana. I would love for you to reiterate your earlier statements about paying yourself and the difference between ensuring your fee is in the budget compared to profit. The two are not the same.
Right. So the artist fee is typically a percentage of the entire budget. And depending on the funder, you'll see anywhere from 10 to 20%. Y'all have an expectation, Mariah and Tara, of what y'all expect that artist fee to be?
No, and what I will say in past rounds, particularly for inspiration grants, the discussion ends up being, so just so everyone's clear, ArtsKC staff members do not choose which grants are selected. We have community committees that choose, and they change every time. But something I have seen consistently is if an artist fee is not included, that will be the discussion. Well, how are they paying themselves at all?
Mm-hmm. You don't want to give those grant panelists any room to question the budget. You know, one of the things is the narrative, the visual documentation is so subjective that a lot of times then a panel will go to the budget because those are objective things that they feel like they can get a hold of better. And so I've seen a number of panels that will really scrutinize the budget because they feel more qualified to scrutinize that. It seems more objective to them, right? And so a lot of times that it will get more attention than maybe we expect, or that we think that it should, because it feels more objective to them. So don't give them any space to question.
And one thing that we do consistently hear is that if something shows up in the budget, but it's not talked about in the narrative or vice versa, that leads to questions as well.
Right. Yeah. Any of those things like, they said they're going to make flyers, but they don't have them in the budget. Or what is this line in the budget? I didn't see anything about that. But it also helps you clean up your thinking. Like, have you accounted for everything? Have you considered everything it's actually going to take to do this? This is why I think for me, it feels freeing at the end. Once I know it's on that document, now I can begin creating, feeling like I have accounted for all of it. I've thought through everything. Now I get to just create. Anybody else? Dana, how would you describe that difference in artist fee and profit, and where else the artist shows up?
Absolutely. I think for me, I just want to encourage our professional artists to pay themselves fairly. The profit is after you've been paid. That is any excess. Profit is not your fee. Fee should be included prior to any kind of net on your budget. And so I just want to reinforce the fact that the project wouldn't be happening without you. You are bringing the core expertise to this endeavor, and to value that, and to not be shy about putting it literally at the top of your budget. We need you and to help us continue to advocate for that point. And we will continue to advocate for that. You must be compensated for your good work.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Kathleen Shaw, and thank you. It's a great program. I have a question about a writing workshop I want to present, a proposal to an organization, and I thought it would be good enough to submit to another organization, but I'm not 100% sure all the information that I should put in the proposal. I don't want it to be too expensive or too low budget. And I like what you guys said about paying yourself, because I love writing, and I wanted to share some writing tools with some people at these organizations. So I was talking to a friend, and we were discussing having me provide notebooks and pens. People could bring their own, or they could bring a laptop, but I'm not 100% sure what the organizations will provide versus what I should provide or put in a budget for. So I would just appreciate any insight on that.
So my advice is always to start bigger, right? So if you want to provide those, you feel like that's something you want to do for the participants, I would add that into your budget. If you need to scale back because some of the funding doesn't come through, then maybe you understand that that's something that could be removed if you need to balance the income and the expense. But start out with the project that you want it to be, right? Don't make yourself or your project smaller to start out with. Like we really do that a lot as artists, right? We feel like that, oh, they won't give us this much money. So we start out from this place of smallness, right? And we want to start out bigger. And then if we need to bring some of those costs down, then we can look for ways to save money. But don't start from that bare bones spot because you think that it's more likely to get funded if it's a smaller number.
Okay, thank you so much.
What would y'all say? Mariah, I see you nodding your head. Is that where you would?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think if you have particular organizations in mind, excuse me, that you're going to propose to, give them the whole thing, and then they can say, oh, well, maybe we can provide this thing, or we have a great resource for this. And it might be different for each time that you do this workshop with an organization, but come at it with the full thing, and they can decide, great, you have it all figured out. We'll give you all the money. We don't have to do anything. Cool. But they may decide that they want to, provide a little bit more.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, hi Elise, good to see you, hear you.
Thank you. When making my budget, I've often considered putting childcare into my expenses. And I'm just curious from your perspective, I do it a little bit as like a middle finger to the, I don't know, just to like say, hey, this is part of my life. This is part of my expenses. I have to find a way to get my kids somewhere so that I can be making this art. Is that frowned upon?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, Elise.
Okay.
I think that's something that would be interesting to ask some funders, ask some people that have been on panels. I haven't seen it done. I know, like from a tax lens, right? That kind of some of those customary expenses, kind of customary living expenses can't be written off. But that's my only basis. I don't really know on the grant side. Anybody else?
Like
come
if it
across
was,
this, or
if you're saying that like it would be sort of like saying, here's my rent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Elise, this is Phyllis.
Yeah, Phyllis.
The one who had the kiddo who decided that he wanted to participate in our session this morning. So I hear where you're coming from with this. I think it's the opportunity you have to include some of those expenses is actually in the fee you pay yourself. Right. And so it would be assumed that you would pay yourself a fee that's actually necessary in order for you to manage your like life expenses. So as a grant maker, I wouldn't think twice about someone's fee if it was within the standard of what you think someone needs to make in order to manage their life expenses.
Right.
Okay, so I would put that under artist fee, but not necessarily need to put it as its own separate line.
Exactly. Just because I am with you, and I actually agree fundamentally to what you're saying, but the opportunity there is for a grant maker to get confused about what all those items are and what they mean. And to Chris's point earlier, you just want to be really clear and leave very little room for gray area in your budget. And so exactly how much you need to pay yourself to manage your life expenses is completely fair game.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I'll chime in just from a, sorry, Sasha. I'll chime in just from an ArtsKC grant perspective. I haven't experienced that or seen anyone include that in their budget. But I agree with Phyllis that if in your kind of back end thinking, if it's in your artist fee, I'm not probably going to question your artist fee at all.
Is it a big red flag, like for our group, me and Laurel's group, like we don't have a whole lot of fees. Like we're trying to get this concert series produced next year. We have the performance space in kind, we have rehearsal space in kind. So mostly it's just, there's a couple things like some publishing things and flyers and blah, blah, blah. But those are kind of piddly amounts compared to the amount that we want to be paid for our own work. Is it a big red flag to like have a giant performer fee and then like our other fees are much smaller?
No.
Okay.
No, and I think that those fees I think in part because those fees should show up on your expense side as what they would be, right? And if you were renting that place, it wouldn't be out of line with a performer, right? That's part of the importance of putting all those costs in the expense side, even though on the income side, they're going to show up as in kind. Does that make sense? I don't think it will look or feel out of balance once you get all of that donated stuff on the expense side.
Okay.
Another good point of putting them into the expense side that I hadn't considered. Yeah, thanks for that. And I think in that case, y'all show up in that budget a couple of times also, right? You show up as the performers, and as you could show up as the artistic director, the artist fee itself. And I might consider some of those different hats that you're wearing and put a monetary value on them, so it's not just one lump sum.
We just feel like we're sort of like monopolizing. Okay, basically we're doing everything and we'd like to get paid for it. You know,
right.
We make a flyer, we put it on Facebook, we make everybody do the thing. We get there, you know, we just feel a little bit like, oh, but that makes sense. If you itemize everything, then people see, oh, they're actually doing all this crap.
Right.
And I guess we would see it too.
Right. Yes. Importantly, you would see it too. And you don't put your name next to it. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not flyer design, Sasha, and documentation, Laurel, right? It's flyer design, it's photography, it's stage manager, it's the role. It's not your name.
Dang. Okay. It's a lot of list making.
No, I would agree with everything Chris just said. I would also, though, be sure that if you are providing those in-kind supports to your project, just do make sure that they're market, right? And so sometimes there can be an opportunity to kind of guess what you think some things would cost. And the only time it gets a little funky from the grant maker perspective or the lender's perspective or whatever type of capital you're pursuing is if it's out of line with what the market fee is, and market being just what other people charge.
Okay.
Yes, great point.
I think that's a great kind of going back to Sasha, you were saying if your fees for marketing, printing flyers, that kind of thing, if you do those so low, and then there's someone in the group that is familiar with how much it costs to promote something, they're going to question, why is that so low? I think that's more of what we see in the community conversations than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So on that note, if we've got a committee of volunteers and we do pretty much everything on that, a whole bunch of different roles, is that treated as like just a standard hourly rate kind of thing, as far as like if we were if I could see that I could get paid like anywhere from 20 to 40 grand for what I'm doing if this were like a corporate world or something. Is that how that's itemized out as far as like in-kind stuff, or is it like an hourly rate? I see Sarah put in the chat that they use $28.54 for volunteers. How is that like kind of broken down?
I'm more than happy to give my first suggestion, Chris, unless you want to take it.
Yeah, no, go right ahead, Phyllis.
No, you would do exactly that. So you would break it down for comparable experience or skills for whatever that volunteer is providing. So if it's something that if you went to a sound tech group and you have a volunteer providing sound tech, then you would just take whatever that annual salary is and make it to a hourly rate and keep and track that and put that into your budget. And the reason why that's helpful is that, you know, I think there's always an opportunity for volunteers, but sometimes you may want to be on a path to actually being able to fund and finance some of these things, and allows you to kind of keep track of exactly what those costs would be. So you know the kind of full, we would call it soup to nuts cost of whatever program or project you're trying to run.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think to Phyllis's point about market rate, right, then that also depends on where you are, right? So it's not just a sound tech, but a sound tech, you know, in Wichita, right? Or are you, or if you're going to take the show to Chicago, right? What is that, right? So market wherever it is, right? So that's the research, that's the phone calls or the whatever to try to fill those numbers in. This is why we don't start with numbers, right? Start with all those roles and then find the numbers that need to go be slid into it.
Well, Tara, do we want to take the next couple minutes to talk about the purpose of inspiration grants and the questions that they'll probably be answering, like community involvement and artistic excellence, and how it will be a catalyst for their artistic career?
Sure. So the inspiration grant, I put this link in the chat so you can see, if you click on it, you can see all this information too. But the purpose of the grant is really to excel or do something that's going to be transformative to your career. So we're looking for projects of risk, growth, and change for the artist. We're also looking at positive impact for the community. It doesn't always have to be both, but it does have to be one or the other. And what Mariah was just mentioning in terms of artistic excellence, community impact, these are the evaluation criteria that the grant committee will be looking at. And we do really try to make this process as transparent as possible. So you as an artist can look at the evaluation form and see exactly what the grant committee is looking for. They're going to be looking at and what questions they're asked. So that's something that I always recommend, and it's something I always do when I'm filling something out, is to look at how you're evaluated. Make sure that your application answers all these questions. So it's artistic achievement and quality, career, and community impact. So as I mentioned, it doesn't necessarily have to be both, but it does have to be one or the other. Feasibility and budget. Those are the big things. Any questions about that?
That goes to that point that I was making, that like artistic achievement, that sort of thing, is so much more subjective that they will oftentimes then go into the budget and the feasibility and begin to ask questions about it because it feels just more objective to them, right?
All right, well, if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you all so much for attending. I hope it was helpful. We have another workshop coming up next week at the same time, Thursday at noon. And we're going to start that off with talking about tax liability, because if you do receive a grant or any capital, there is tax liability involved. So we'll talk about that. And we'll also talk about the legal basics around forming a corporation or an LLC or a nonprofit. So business basics within legal. This is not my expertise, as you can tell, but we will talk about the legal basics. We'll start with tax and we'll cover other issues as well. So I hope we'll see you there. Again, email me if you have any questions about what we talked about today, or if you would like the link to sign up if you haven't gotten it already. So go ahead, Chris.
I've got a question actually on the behalf of a couple of people I see on here that I'm familiar with their work. For an ensemble project, how does that fit into Inspiration Grant, or does that fit into Catalyst, or, you know, some of these performers are, you know, it's more ensemble work, right?
I'll go ahead and answer that one. So if you're applying as an individual artist, there is a section where we ask, you know, who are you collaborating with? And it actually usually does better in the committees if you're collaborating with other local artists. So that does not take you out of the running whatsoever. What will take you out of the running for this category in particular for inspiration is if you apply as a nonprofit. That to our other categories for project, which you could, you know, if you are a 501c3, you could apply in project for a similar type of, you know, ensemble concert or something like that. Or you could apply in our mission grant category, where we're just giving you NOC funding for your nonprofit in general, and it's not specific to a project. Does that answer the question, Chris?
So what about a for-profit partnership?
That's a great question, and something that we're trying to solve in our grant categories as of right now. There are some other funding options in the community, and Phyllis had to leave, but CCF is another one of those funding options. If you already have an LLC, or you're already incorporated as something other than a nonprofit, but I would advise to apply as an individual to the inspiration grant category, as an individual artist, and here are my collaborators. That's how I would advise that. But that is a great question to bring up again next week in that legal workshop, because if you do have funding that comes to you as an individual person, and we talked a little bit about this, Chris, we don't want to mix that funding you're getting as an individual with the funding that comes into your LLC.
Laurel and Sasha, how are y'all organized? Are y'all just individuals?
Very shittily. We're just two people, and we have one bank account, and we get very confused. That's how we're organized. Yes. Not legally, probably.
And for me, I've got a theater company. We are not, we're a fiscally sponsored project, but we have an LLC. So from that, it sounds like basically like what you just said about making sure that funds don't commingle, that makes me really nervous, the idea of going in and applying as an individual, because ultimately it's going to end up being the company that is like doing the work.
Right, and because you are fiscally sponsored, you're eligible to apply, even though you're an LLC. As a having a fiscal sponsor means that you'll be able to use the nonprofit tax ID of whoever is your sponsor, so you can apply through them to our other categories.
And to clarify,
the next grant up, I think.
Yeah, to clarify, you mean, Mariah, that he can apply for project or mission, but not inspiration?
Correct. And we can go into more depth about this at next Thursday's workshop if you're available. And we can talk about the specifics of why you would want to do one versus the other.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm planning on coming to next week, and I do have some probably bigger questions than can be answered next week, as far as whether we do need to go and transition to being a 501c3 and all of that. And I think that's probably a much bigger question.
So Kevin, sorry, let me make a suggestion offline here. Yeah. Have you had did you fill out the one-on-one form for facilitators? If you haven't, maybe if my advice would be to meet with Bo Bledsoe. And you can do that through that one-on-one form, facilitator to facilitator one-on-one.
And where I'm not familiar with this with the form, so
I'll send it to you. I think Diane Scott sent it to us this week. I can send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But basically, it's making Artist Inc. facilitators available to other Artist Inc. facilitators for coaching. And Bo Bledsoe is your guy.
Okay, great. And I just want to make sure I'm not an artist. I went through Artist Inc., but I'm not an Artist Inc. facilitator. Does that?
Yeah, I think you could still sign up with him, I think.
Okay, great.
And a suggestion that I'll make just for everyone to reiterate, those are really great questions, Kevin, and ArtsKC. So me, Tara, we're probably your best options, particularly Tara. Just call us and email us, or we can set an hour meeting time just to kind of talk through the different options that you have and connect you with other people that are different funding sources or have a different perspective on how you might go about incorporating.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we're available, really any questions you have. We can always help you find someone to answer that question if we can't answer it.
Fantastic. Are your contact information, was that all in the chat, or was that, how can we connect?
We'll email out all of the slides and the information that you need after the meeting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.